we go now?
Order. Bradley Thomas to move the motion.
Continue.
I beg to move that this House has considered the listed places of worship scheme, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr. Weston. There are around 20,000 listed...
Before my honourable friend develops this debate, can I make an inquiry as to why on the order paper today there is, under section 4 of written statements to be made, there's one from the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport saying future of the listed places of worship grant scheme. If that statement is being made today and it's on the order paper, would it not be very convenient for us to be able to see a copy of the statement before this debate begins, so it can inform this debate rather than something being left till after the debate?
Secretary, thank you for your point of order, and I'm sure this is something the Minister will attend to in his wind-up speech. Bradley.
Thank you, Chairman. There are around 20,000 listed cathedrals, churches and chapels in use across the UK, belonging to a wide range of denominations, together with a number of important listed synagogues, mosques and temples. These buildings are valued for their architecture, history and for the economic and social benefit they bring to the communities they serve. These beautiful buildings with storied histories that serve as both sacred spaces for the religious and community spaces for the wider public. The listed places of worship grant scheme supports faith communities by allowing places of worship to reclaim the full amount of VAT spent on eligible repairs, alterations and additions to their building. This includes vital repair work such as to roofs and to stonework, improving facilities such as kitchens and toilets, and improving the thermal performance of the building. At present, the scheme, which only spends around £30 million per year, is due to close on the 31st of March 2025. And no extension or alternative is as of yet known. If the scheme is cancelled or scaled back, it would be devastating for the historic buildings, local communities and the heritage construction sector. What a travesty this would be if, for the sake of £30 million to the Exchequer, the government exacerbates the decay of our historic, spiritual and social heritage with no upside. I will give way.
I'm very grateful and I'm very pleased that he's brought this debate. He mentions the frankly trifling sum that this tax could bring into the Exchequer. Does he recognise also the enormous value, economic value, quantifiable economic value that church buildings bring to our community, some billions of pounds? And I particularly reference the work of Bishop Andrew Rumsey, Bishop of Ramsbury in my constituency, leading the work that the Church of England is doing on this. Does he agree that there's economic value outweighs the Treasury receipts that they would get?
I thank my honourable friend for his contribution and agree wholeheartedly that this is not just about the social value. There is a profound economic value that goes strictly beyond the £30 million that's being referenced here today. The Church of England alone has a backlog of repairs to parish churches estimated at over £1 billion, and the annual need is estimated to be £150 million per year, and large-scale closures are sweeping across churches in Scotland and Wales too. There are 969 places of worship on Historic England's 2024 Heritage at Risk Register, and more than 60% of all the MPs in England have a church, chapel, meeting house or cathedral on the Historic England Heritage at Risk Register within their constituency. The listed places of worship grant scheme is the only regular financial support that the government provides to help those looking after these buildings, and by financial support I mean simply a refund of the tax that they've already paid to the Exchequer.
Well, I'm not going to give way.
I will give way.
Christ Church Priory is one of the churches which is on the list of churches at risk. But can he also confirm that it would be possible for the Culture, Media and Sport Department to be saved any costs on this if my private member's bill, due for hearing on the Friday the 28th of March, was passed to exempt from value-added tax listed places of worship repairs, because that in itself would sort the problem out?
I thank my right honourable friend for highlighting the case of Christ Church Priory, and I am certain that on Friday he will be the strongest advocate for the proposal that he puts forwards. This refund of the tax that they've already paid is vital because in the UK, unlike most of Europe, our places of worship depend overwhelmingly on local people to raise the funding for their buildings. In France, Belgium, Germany and Italy, by contrast, the same buildings are either owned by the state or supported by special taxes. The scheme was introduced in its current form by the Labour government in 2004, when the Right Honourable Gordon Brown, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, recognised the harm that could be caused to these buildings by other changes to VAT. Launched in the House of Lords in December 2001 by Baroness Blackstone, who stated, "This new grant will provide much-needed public support for these historic buildings. The scheme underlines the value this government places on our important historic environments," and I plead with the current government to also recognise that.
Would my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and can I congratulate him on securing this important debate. These listed places of worship scheme is vital for our communities. The previous Conservative government extended it in 2023, and since 2022, 5 grants have been awarded in my constituency in Epping Forest. I've been contacted by a number of places of worship deeply concerned about the future of this scheme. So does my honourable friend agree with me, for the sake of worship, outreach, youth work, helping vulnerable people, community hubs, it is the right thing to do for the government to extend this scheme?
I wholeheartedly agree with my honourable friend that for all of the economic and social benefits that he has touched upon, and many others that I'm sure members in this House will cite today, this scheme should be extended. This is a no-brainer for the government to pursue. Since 2004, it has been renewed by every government in power, but now a new commitment decision needs to be made because the current commitment comes to an end in just a few weeks' time. Since 2001, 13,000 places of worship have been supported by this scheme. This has allowed them to safeguard the future of some of our most important local heritage. In addition to their architectural significance, cathedrals, churches and chapels form the nation's largest art collections, including sculpture, stained glass, wall paintings, woodwork, metalwork and vernacular art. Church buildings also form a vital part of the identity of Britain's landscapes and townscapes. They act as the visual centre for tens of thousands of communities. In my constituency, Bromsgrove, St John's is a Grade 2 listed church in the centre of the town where the top section of the spire needs replacing to remain structurally safe and continue to be the beacon for Bromsgrove. The parochial church council and Friends of St John's are in receipt of nearly £250,000 from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, plus match funding from trusts, foundations and local fundraising to achieve a total project cost in the region of £430,000. If a VAT bill in excess of £80,000 becomes unclaimable, there is a risk that this project could become untenable. Members across this House will all have stories from their own constituencies, where residents are raising money to repair their local place of worship, and in doing so, keep it as a community asset and pass it down to the next generation. We are merely custodians of these assets that we are talking about. St John's is just one example, but in my constituency there are over 20 listed places of worship that benefit from the scheme. And I just want to highlight very quickly a few of those. Christ Church in Catshill, Holy Trinity and St Mary at Dodford, Church of St Leonard at Frankley, Church of St John the Baptist at Hagley, Church of St Kenelm at Romsley, Church of St Bartholomew at Tardebigg, the Church of St Michael at Stoke Prior, Church of St Lawrence at Alvechurch, Church of St John the Baptist, Church of All Saints on Birmingham Road, the Church of St Leonard in Clent, Church of St Leonard in Bearley, the Roman Catholic Church in Bromsgrove, the Church of St Catherine at Lickey in Blackwell, Church of St Mary at Withel, Church of the Holy Trinity in Balbroughton, Church of St Michael Cofton Hackett, Church of St Wulston and St Oswald in Clent, Church of St Godwold and the Church of St Andrew at Barnt Green. We will all have at least a dozen, 20, maybe more churches or listed places of worship that are under threat for the sake of £30 million that government cannot commit to or hasn't committed to as of now. I will give way.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. The grant scheme being debated today enabled St Paul's in my constituency of Chichester to undergo some radical improvements to accessibility and also to their community spaces, because without these community spaces that operate out of churches and cathedrals, then those homes for charities no longer exist. So does the honourable member agree with me that for every £1 spent in churches shows a £16 return in the community, and therefore this is an investment in the future of community groups and charities?
Good point.
I think the honourable lady summed it up perfectly, and I thank her for highlighting the example of St Paul's in Chichester, and this is a perfect segue into the point I was just about to make, that this is not just about heritage and religion that is at risk if the scheme lapses. churches and other places of worship, they are hubs of their local communities. Church of England churches alone support over 35,000 social action projects, including food banks, community larders, debt, drug, alcohol advice and rehabilitation groups. In recent years where we've seen energy price rises, churches have acted as warm spaces, and in times of extreme weather events, they've been gathering points for the safety and hospitality required in communities that are seeking refuge from flooding and other weather events. Churches, chapels and meeting houses in the UK host and run vital support. This could be anything from alcohol anonymous meetings to mental health support, parent and toddler groups. The saving to the NHS is £8.4 billion a year, estimated to deliver this kind of facility to communities. The contribution that churches and cathedrals make to our creative industries and to tourism is also very significant. 9.3 million people visited English cathedrals in 2023. That's a staggering 17% increase on the year before, with many of the visitors coming from overseas. Churches, cathedrals, places of worship, they are a UK export in that sense. Churches are by far the largest base for amateur music making by choirs and orchestras, as well as housing thousands of professional performances ranging from pop to classical music each year. They foster talent. Musicians, including singer-songwriter Ed Sheeran and leading violinist Tasmin Little, began their musical careers by taking part in church music. I will give way.
I'm extremely grateful, and obviously he would want to recognise the centrality to the country of Salisbury Cathedral's contribution in terms of music and architectural elegance, but also the fact that every church takes on great responsibility itself to raise funds before it looks to the government. And the National Churches Conservation Trust, the National Churches Trust, do a great deal to support churches who are trying to help themselves. But this VAT support from government and the continuity of it is a crucial additional element that goes alongside that private endeavour.
I thank my honourable friend for his contribution and for highlighting the significant cultural importance of Salisbury Cathedral, and he is spot on. We know that volunteers across our communities, they sweat everything that they possibly can out of fundraising endeavours. This is not a case of going to the government in the first instance. This is them simply asking for some support that ultimately enables churches to be net economic contributors to the communities where they are operating. I will.
Mr. Weston, I probably ought to indicate that I've proudly served in the past as a member of the Ecclesiastical Committee, although I don't regard this as just an Anglican issue at all. But further to the point raised by my right honourable friend, the member for Salisbury, the support for these buildings, the support for the churches, our churches, comes from generous donations from members of the public. Those donations are given for a very specific purpose. And would my right honourable friend agree with me, and I hope that the Minister will be able to comment upon this later, that this is money freely given, but it's not freely given to be taxed?
I think my honourable friend makes an excellent point. There are so many generous benefactors across the country who are giving their funds that they've, in most cases, paid income tax on to support churches and places that provide spiritual and social well-being. And government should recognise that, and I certainly hope that the Minister will reference that point in his remarks. These buildings are loved by their communities, and in most part they are also cared for by volunteers. In rural communities particularly, the care of these magnificent buildings is in the hands of a few committed people, many of whom are later in their years. They diligently raise funds for the repair of the church building that has shaped the life of their village and community for centuries. And whilst I've raised major projects above, the potential loss of the scheme in these places, where they may claim only a few £1,000s per year, will determine how much maintenance and repair can take place, and at worst could be the difference between being solvent or not and the long-term survival and preservation of these buildings as well. Places of worship are the very essence of placemaking and community. They provide enormous value to society, value that our country would be immeasurably poorer without. The National Churches Trust's House of Good report calculated that the total UK-wide economic and social value of places of worship had a market value and replacement cost of £2.4 billion per year. I hope that puts into perspective what excellent value the listed places of worship scheme is for the long-term preservation of these assets. That is £2.4 billion of value for a scheme that costs just £29 million per year. Clearly, this amount of money makes no material difference to the state of the country's £1 trillion of expenditure, so I simply can't understand what is under threat here. If the government were not to renew the listed places of worship grant scheme, the task of keeping church buildings in good repair and open for people to use would be made much harder. Quite simply, more money would need to be raised by local people to pay VAT to the government on top of the costs of skilled labour, materials and other project costs. And the damage that will be done to parish churches across England will come at a particularly difficult time when our communities are becoming less united than ever. The last 50 years have seen unprecedented change with mass immigration, enhanced social mobility and evolving social attitudes. All of these factors have changed and pushed our communities in different directions and made society less cohesive. Instead of attacking one of the few last community spaces left, I ask the government to continue to fund the scheme going forwards. I urge the government to look now at making this permanent and not just a temporary reprieve. A permanent scheme would enable the larger places of worship, such as cathedrals, which plan their repair work over 5 to 20-year periods to commit to long-term projects with certainty that VAT costs will be covered by the scheme.
Hear, hear.
I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called in the debate. There are clearly many who are standing. Given there are so many, we will start with a time limit of 3 minutes. And I would ask that any interventions are kept to a minimum. The question is that this House has considered the listed places of worship scheme. Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Mr Weston, and it's a real pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Bromsgrove for securing this important and timely debate. And the strength of feeling on this issue is very clear. An answer to a written question that I recently tabled revealed that between early September and mid-December 2024, the Department received 323 items of correspondence on this topic. As such, I'm pleased... Yes, I understand that. As such, I am pleased to have the opportunity to debate this important subject today. Faith and charity sector partners are deeply concerned that the listed places of worship grant may not be extended beyond its current date, end of 31st of March this year. And not only does this grant scheme help sustain treasured local buildings that hold the story of our nation and through their work contribute every day to the common good, but by enabling repairs to historic religious buildings, the grant scheme directly impacts communities across the UK, benefiting people of all faiths and none from all walks of life. Now, the Church in Wales operates 1,221 places of worship, cathedrals, churches and chapels across Wales, and 73% of these are listed buildings. These treasured buildings play a central role in communities and form a remarkable treasury of significant architecture, art and history, and local memory and culture. And as I outlined in my question to the Church Commissioners last week, over the last 2 years alone, St Woolas Cathedral in Newport has reclaimed over £87,000 through the scheme. Further projects are in the wings, and if they cannot reclaim the VAT, this will lead to further delays. So they're wondering whether to include in these repairs the upgrade and development of the facilities of the cathedral offers for the benefit of the community. This would be between £3 and £4 million. VAT added to this would make the project unachievable, so ending this particular project. Given that repairs and developments are only possible through fundraising, as has already been outlined, to find an additional 20% will mean that some projects quite simply will not take place. I will.
I'm very grateful. The Honourable Lady talks about some projects that are not going to be able to continue, and St Martin's Low Heritage Trust in my Hazel Grove constituency are in exactly that position. It's really a treasury of the arts and crafts movement in England, and I'm sure that the Honourable Lady would agree with me that the scheme should continue, or clarity on its future should be encouraged from the Minister today.
Yeah.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her contribution, and she's quite right. It would be good to have clarity today. I appreciate the statements coming, but it would be really good to have a clarity from the Minister this morning. Because places of worship contribute immensely to social and economic value, health and well-being. Part of the food collections that the cathedral makes each week enables 500 children to be given breakfast in one school for 2 weeks. They support other schools, refugees, the homeless and other food local projects too. And they provide a place for the charity Mind to meet free of charge. Over the recent Christmas period, 1,000 people passed through the cathedral doors for services alone. And this was 20% up on last year. The cathedral is open every day and people regularly call in for quiet reflection and for assistance in distress. Crucially, this is only possible because the building is in good repair. Mr Weston, this is just one of the examples of the way the places of worship in Newport West and Isloin have used these monies wisely over the years. I would strongly encourage the government to extend the scheme for all the economic and social benefit that it provides, and I do look forward to hearing the Minister's response this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on the Father of the House, Edward Lee.
I congratulate my honourable friend for Bromsgrove on his speech and on moving this motion today. As the government is giving a statement this afternoon, this might be the shortest and most successful campaigns ever. Churches are one of the great glories of Lincolnshire. We have 124 listed churches in my constituency alone. I visited all of them, particularly sometimes when I have a rest from canvassing in the 11 general elections I've fought. The later editions of the Pevsner Guide describes Lincolnshire as incredibly rich in medieval churches, from Saxon times onwards, many of them still little known. In villages and towns up and down the county, there are small churches, often medieval, that are precious works of art. They are also focal points for the community. As pubs, shops and post offices shut in our villages, the church remains, whether or not services are held regularly. We are not unique in Lincolnshire, as colleagues know from all over the country. Now, I want to quote from a worshipper at St Jad's Church in Dunholm, a member of the Parochial Church Council. We are all deeply concerned that the above scheme is due to expire in March 2025 and fearful that it may not be extended for another term. I'm sure you're well aware of the plight of fundraising in rural areas in order to maintain and improve Grade 1 listed buildings, plus the absolute need to ensure they are there for future generations. We are constantly fundraising to ensure that our beautiful rural church is fit for purpose to meet the needs of both the community and worshippers. And obviously, she very much speaks from the heart. Now, in Lincolnshire, we have some glorious countryside. I've spent many years as president of Lincolnshire Ramblers, and one of the great joys of being an MP for Gainsborough is walking in the Wolds. At Walesby Old Church, we know is known as a Ramblers Church. It's open to one and all the time to come and spend a moment of quiet contemplation. Thanks to the efforts of many volunteers, we also have the West Lindsey Open Churches Festival every year. Across 2 weekends this May, we will have 88 churches open to the public, completely free of charge. Church volunteers are present to explain. Now, public places of Catholic worship were not allowed until 1791, so our medieval churches today are only slightly more than a handful. Nonetheless, there's been a growth in the appreciation of the architecture of 18th and 19th and 20th century churches. Indeed, Augustus Pugin, the architect responsible for much of what we see around us, designed many Catholic churches that are now listed. Of the 3,000 Catholic churches in England and Wales, 750 are listed. Many have seen their listings upgraded to Grade 1 or Grade 1. So I urge the Minister, when he sums up this debate, to listen to the debate, concede, and carry on this wonderful scheme.
Rachel Maskell.
I'm delighted to see you in the chair. Let me set the scene. There are around 80 places of worship in York, from York Minster through to a small Orthodox congregation who wrote to me this week who are seeking a new place. Buildings young and old, as well as well-established places. But the listed places of worship grant scheme is an essential part of their upkeep. There are two matters that I want to raise that haven't been raised yet in the debate. First, the belfry. Adjacent to York Minster, the belfry is currently under tarpaulin. The windows have been removed, the walls stripped back to the stone, the roof is about to come off, and scaffolding is holding everything together. The grant is central to the £8.5 million project continuing. Without it, I hope the Minister will explain what will happen to this gutted church and its community of 600 worshippers. The grant is worth £1.5 million to them. And after a tremendous fundraising effort from the church, they need this scheme to continue. And they are urging the Minister to at least confirm that existing projects will continue to their completion. It isn't just about the church, but the social infrastructure, where £1.5 million is being invested in mental health support, children and youth services, as well as making York a poverty-free city. It is crucial for my community, as well as the local economy, tourism, and of course our fabulous heritage sector. And it sits in the new cathedral precinct, which is part of the local neighbourhood plan. So having the spec at the standard that is required, as 9 million visitors come to York, the second most visited place in the UK, and where the York Minster is the most visited. And it will be a place that opens, that not only explains their heritage, but also enables people to explore their faith. Having a 15% hole in this budget would stop the scheme. My second point that I want to raise is that York has developed its new International Centre of Excellence for Heritage Crafts, from stonemasons to glaziers. They'll be preserving the traditions which many people in this debate today will benefit from. In fact, across the world are looking to the centre. It is unique in the crafts that it will be maintaining and ensuring that tradition is preserved. So much of the centre demand will come from different projects which are going to be funded by the listed places of worship grant. So I hope the Minister will be able to help the centre draw greater success as it embarks on this new journey by ensuring that the grant enables demand to be placed at the centre's door. There are so many churches and other organisations which have written to me saying this scheme must continue.
Halings.
Thank you, and it's nice to serve under your chairship. For over 23 years, the Listed Places of Worship grant scheme has been a lifeline for communities in South Cambridgeshire, with enabling congregations to afford vital repairs on their historical buildings, buildings which quite often are the beating heart of our communities, providing youth groups, even vaccine centres, warm places to gather, bringing people together. And the loss of this scheme would really put a lot of that in jeopardy. And in South Cambridgeshire, those places where they have the listed places of worship include Cherry Hinton, Coton, Stapleford, Gamlingay, Bassingbourn, Hincton, Inkleford, Harston, Duxford, Thriplow and Great Shelford. With the scheme set to expire in March 2025, this would place all of this progress and the vital roles these buildings play in our communities in jeopardy. Without a renewed commitment from the government, congregations will struggle to afford the repairs needed to keep their places of worship open and functioning. And the much-respected Reverend Karen Foth-Hammond of St Andrew's Church in St Andrews in Cherry Hinton explained to me that this impact will also affect the congregation's ability to access other grant funds. For example, they were enabled to receive a £250,000 grant from the Heritage Lottery Fund. But it was only by having the exemption from the VAT scheme that enabled them to be able to really receive that and use that funds. They wouldn't be able to do that if the scheme was taken away, and this will affect many others. So the list of these communities is long, as in many other communities. And I'd like to mention what they've come to me to tell me about the plans that they have in place, which would be put in at risk now. So in Bassingbourn Parish Church, their restoration plans to move away from fossil fuel reliance would be at risk. The 3 medieval churches in Fendit and Horningsea and Teversham mean that the essential repairs for steep costs of restoration again would be at risk. The community spaces in All Saints Church at Harston used during lockdown, which they want to keep expanding, again would be put at risk. The small village church in St Mary and St John in Hinxton relies heavily on the exemption. In St Peter's Church in Horningsea, the church has been saved from disrepair with significant help from the VAT funds. The Grade 1 listed building in Great Shelford Parish Church relies on the VAT to reclaim and afford the essential repairs, and without it, they won't be able to maintain the structure and the historic doom painting, which would be terrible. The 12th century building at St George's Church in Thripple, they want to, with the community, level the nave floor. They're not going to be able to do this. The Grade 1 listed church in Wadden, St Maurice Church, would also be at risk. The importance of this scheme is critical. Please continue it and make sure that we can keep these congregations and their listed places of worship at the centre of our communities. Thank you.
Terry Jeremy.
Mr Weston, and it is an honour to serve under your chairmanship, and I would like to congratulate the member for Bromsgrove for securing this debate. My constituency of South West Norfolk is home to 138 places of worship, all unique in character and valued by the local community. That includes Wigan Hall St German's Church just outside King's Lynn, a 13th century Grade 1 listed church who wrote to me just recently about this very topic being debated. I am a proud Norfolk boy, and I remember vividly the English poet and writer John Betjeman, who spoke about how Norfolk would not be Norfolk without a church tower on the horizon or round a corner up a lane. We cannot spare a single Norfolk church, he said. When a church has been pulled down, the country seems empty or is like a necklace with a jewel missing. Now, I cannot come up with words quite as poetic as John Betjeman, but I can tell you that the churches in my constituency are treasured, and in many cases they are of an historic nature. We must make sure that we are preserving them for future generations to come, as previous generations have done so for us. Nearly half of all Grade 1 buildings in England are churches. These buildings are largely run by volunteers who have to raise the funds needed for repairs. The ability to reclaim the VAT on these works makes an enormous difference, as we have heard from others, particularly at a time when costs for building works are substantially increasing. Mr Weston, South West Norfolk, like many rural constituencies, these buildings are so often more than a place of worship. They can be the very lifeblood of the local community, providing services to people that otherwise may miss out. One church in South West Norfolk which I think exemplifies this is St Mary's in Feltwell, and I was fortunate enough to visit this church in 2024, and I was deeply impressed by the work that they do to support their local community in Feltwell. This includes the food pantry, which sees a group of local volunteers set up a small shop with greatly reduced priced essentials to help local villagers. They also provide crisis packs free of charge to those in need, and this initiative is run alongside their regular coffee mornings and their community group, which provides free access to computers and the internet, a provision which sadly too in many rural communities many do not have access to. And I was grateful to... Indeed.
I don't know for giving way, and does he agree with me that it's imperative that the listed places of worship scheme or a replacement is put in place in short order, not least because this isn't just about buildings, but this is also about supporting communities such as that in Horwich, which attend Horwich Parish Church, where many worshippers have contacted me about making sure that places of worship are retained for future generations to use, but also to provide important spiritual and community support for people in my Bolton West constituency.
Thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and it's been wonderful today to hear so many examples about community services being run through churches, and we've all got examples in our own constituency. When I went to Feltwell, I was so impressed by Sue Garland and the other volunteers for the work that they do, and it was a joy to see that they are preserving the building, but importantly giving it life and purpose. Mr Weston, these provisions are crucial and highlight what our local places of worship provide in their communities, and that is why I believe it is vital that we do all that we can to support the maintenance of places of worship. And I would welcome the Minister clarifying whether the grant scheme can be renewed for another year, as we have heard. St Mary's, which I mentioned earlier, is just one of 20 churches in South West Norfolk which has benefited from the listed places of worship grant scheme in the last financial year. However, they remain on the Heritage at Risk register and in desperate need of repair. That is why I urge the Minister to consider what can be done to protect our most precious historic places of worship. Thank you.
Cox.
Thank you, Mr Weston. It would be an act of cultural, social and spiritual mutilation not to continue with this scheme, which is why I don't think that the Minister will announce later that it will not be continued. My concern is that we are here debating this very important but limited scheme. But there is on the horizon an even bigger problem. with which the government may have to grapple. My concern, if I may say so, is not the great cathedrals of this country, which will always attract their supporters, for which my right honourable friend for Salisbury represents one of the greatest cathedrals. It is for the small parish churches, small arcs that have existed down the centuries as repositories of the spiritual aspiration, the emotions, the cultural and historical identities of rural communities, ancestors buried there, pilgrimages paid to their gravesides, which one by one are clinging on only by the efforts of half a dozen or so elderly volunteers, giving up the time in the last years of their lives to preserve what has mattered so much to them. What happens when those volunteers go? We're seeing it already in Torridge and Tavistock. Churches are closing. I saw the Bishop of Exeter the other day to discuss it. This scheme alone will not cause the survival of those extraordinary buildings so precious to our culture, our history and our nation. And I implore the Minister to start to give thought to what should happen when these places of worship close. Are they to be converted into housing, often surrounded by open burial grounds? Not likely. We need to give thought to what will happen to these wonderful places, though not now sacred, perhaps in some cases when they're closed, but still precious to the community's identity and to our national inheritance. I know the Minister will not discontinue this scheme. I would be astonished if the Minister committed such an act of Philistine vandalism that for the sake of a few £1 million, putting at risk all these extraordinary buildings. What I ask the Minister to consider is what next. Let's not stop just at this. My honourable friend for Christchurch has a private member's bill on repair VAT. It's time we considered what more can be done for these buildings. What more can be done not only for the buildings, which are simply bricks and mortar, stone and wonderful cultural artefacts within them, but representing as they do the hopes and aspirations of so many thousands of people, even if they do not now, because the sea of faith, once too at the full, now is suffering from that long, melancholy withdrawing roar. I know the Minister knows exactly to which I refer. I have complete confidence in him, and I look forward to his statement this afternoon.
Jenny Riddle-Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr Weston. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I would like to congratulate the member for Bromsgrove for securing this important and timely debate. Religious buildings are a vital part of our country's heritage and architectural history, but of course they play a central role in our communities. These spaces often serve as hubs, as we've heard this morning already, where volunteers come together to help the most vulnerable. Many of the churches in parishes across Suffolk Coastal host food banks and community larders, providing vital support to so many. These places of worship rely on the List of Places of Worship grant, and many of these parish churches receive no regular financial support and often rely on their local communities to dig deep. And my main message to the Minister today is that in rural constituencies where we have small parishes and small communities, there's a huge burden already on fundraising. And as we've just heard, the larger, more well-known cathedrals might attract fundraising more easily. And the 15th century tower, part of St Elthbert's Church in Falkenham, is a really good example of a rural church that provides so many for so few. Falkenham is a small village with a population of less than 200, and the church has an average attendance on a Sunday of just about 15 people, but it plays a much bigger role in our community. There is nowhere in the village other than this church for residents to meet, and so often it's used for coffee mornings, for concerts, for social gatherings, and it often has up to 100 people attend those events. The same is true in Sibton, where the parish has the only one public building that is the church, and that's the Church of St Peter's. The number of permanent homes is just 80, and the community rely on that church, which dates back to the 12th century as a public building. But with a village population that could probably fit in this room, it's hard to fundraise the money that's needed. And as you can imagine, that refund is vitally important. Similarly,
honourable member for giving way. Shankill Parish Church in my constituency of Lurgan is iconic within the town. It's been part of the fabric of the town since 1725 and was rebuilt in 1863 following the Ulster Revival in 1859. Shankill is a listed building. They are refurbishing at the moment, and the fact that this grant has been stalled means that they are no longer able to continue with that project unless this grant is reinstated. That means the preaching of the gospel is impacted, and the great spiritual and practical support that they give to the community is in jeopardy. Now, they will survive and they will continue, but this is a key part of that overall project.
I thank the honourable member for her intervention, and I hope the clarity that we'll receive shortly will provide reassurances. I'd like to draw attention to further churches in my constituency, just briefly two more. St Edmund's Church in Bromswell is a Grade 1 listed building that has been serving the community for around 1,000 years. And whilst the community has raised the funds necessary for repair and improvement works, the task is becoming all the harder and all the steeper if VAT is not refundable. In Blythburgh, the Holy Trinity Church, which serves a parish of just 300 people, is an uphill task to fundraise and to keep the Grade 1 listed church in good repair and open to all. So the grant scheme has allowed the necessary works to be carried out for so many of the churches that we've talked about today, and many more besides. And if we were to, and for places like Blythburgh that I've just mentioned, the changes and repair work they've done have made massive improvements, improving toilets, building a new kitchen, enabling them to extend the use of the building for wider community use. These are important improvements that will help to continue to serve rural and remote communities. And finally, the same is true for St Mary's Church in Walton, a beautiful Grade 2 listed church that's recently required works in excess of £35,000. So these are just a few of the many fantastic churches in Suffolk Coastal that are doing so much for so many and working hard to raise the funds that they need to ensure that they can survive and adapt to meet the needs of their community. So I, along with many other colleagues from across all sides of the House, urge the Government to continue the listed place of worship grant scheme beyond March of this year. Thank you.
Rick Smith.
Thank you, Mr Weston. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate my honourable friend for Bromsgrove for bringing this important debate on the listed places of worship grant scheme to the attention of the House. The stakes are high if this scheme is discontinued, and if it is discontinued, will put immense pressure on that small number of volunteers others have spoken of to keep these precious places of worship in good order, because churches are not just places of worship. In my constituency, for example, Holy Trinity Church in Prestwood hosts a monthly breakfast between services, as well as toddlers, activity groups and regular club-a-size sessions. St Mary's in Long Crendon hosts choral evenings, mother and baby groups, orchestral events, and very importantly, a beer festival. Without critical restoration work and the grant scheme making it possible, churches risk losing their vital place in the wider community. Take, Mr Weston, the 800-year-old St Mary Magdalene Church in Great Hampden, where fundraising started in 2018 for £300,000, excluding VAT, for which restorative paintworks alone cost £50,000. The VAT relief afforded through the grant scheme was so critical to the project that in its absence, fundraising would have continued to this day and work would not have even started. The rector and her team have even arranged a loan facility to cover the time it might take to claim the VAT refund because they could not raise the funds to cover that element of the cost. In the rector's words, the project would not have been possible without the grant scheme. I've also heard from St Mary's Church in Prince's Risborough, which alongside St Peter's Church in Ilmer has benefited hugely from the grant scheme in allowing both improvements and maintenance of the building. In the coming months and years, substantial building works will be required, which will benefit both the church and the community, which without the grant scheme simply won't happen. And in Great Missenden, St Peter's and St Paul's Church provides a valuable service by providing a community space in the adjacent Oldham Hall for activities supporting the village's Church of England school, as well as the church itself. The Treasurer has made clear to me that the enhanced efficiency in planning for major works that the grant scheme allows for has been of great help to the church and the wider community in recent years. Mr Weston, that is just a snapshot of how critical this scheme is to my constituents. When Conservatives were in government, the scheme was renewed every year, and we see and appreciate the value to communities of the vital and multifaceted roles that churches have, both in bringing people together and symbolising the proud history and traditions of our rural towns and villages. I hope that is foremost in the Minister's mind when he hopefully delivers good news in his winding up or in the written ministerial statement later today.
Due to the constraints of time and the number of interventions, after the next speaker, we're going to have to reduce it to 2 minutes, I'm afraid. Gideon Amos.
Thank you, Mr. Weston. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Bromsgrove for bringing this debate. In Taunton and Wellington, we're fortunate to have stunning examples of historic places of worship, from St Peter's Church to Staple Fitzpaine, to what Simon Jenkins, someone I don't always agree with, Mr Weston, called the noblest parish tower in the whole of England at St Mary Magdalene, the Minster in Taunton. These buildings are not just part of our history, they are living, breathing providers of community services. Almost half of Grade 1 listed buildings in England are historic churches, and maintaining them, of course, comes at considerable cost. Churches and their congregations provide our country with a considerable public benefit by preserving these historic structures, a benefit that many of my constituents from such congregations worry they will not be able to continue to carry out if this scheme comes to an end, Mr Weston. Continuation of this scheme is simply a fair acknowledgement of that massive voluntary contribution. In fact, it's not just a fair deal for the government, it's a bargain, I suggest to the Minister. For the value gained from this scheme goes way beyond the heritage and cultural value. It enables churches, mosques, synagogues, temples to deliver essential community and voluntary services, as we've heard from examples across the country. I know from my constituents how crucial they find St Gregory's Mother and Toddler Group, how important they find Staple Fitzpaine's weekly cafe and music events, or simply as a place for lonely to meet, enjoy a hot drink and access expert advice, which is provided at St John the Baptist. Or All Saints Norton Fitzwarren, St John's Staple Grove, St Peter and St Paul's North Curry, St John's Wellington, All Saints Charles, St Augustine's of West Monkton, name just a few. The sheer scale and quantity of community services provided by these places is impossible to list, and I'd be here all day if I tried to do so. Mr Weston, these places of worship are not just buildings, they're community hubs of our towns and villages. It's right that we continue to recognise this fact and support them. Let us protect not only our heritage, but the lifelines these places of worship provide the communities that they serve.
Ben Obsujecti.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Weston. May I also congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Bromsgrove, on securing this important debate. I've been contacted from so many pillars of the community in my constituency who are deeply concerned about what this might mean for their places of worship. This is about the preservation of heritage, ensuring that our future generations can enjoy places of beauty and history central to our heritage and our culture. In Great Staunton, St Andrew's Church has stood for 800 years. The chair of their renovation project, Anthony Withers, wrote to me at the end of last year, deeply concerned that their aim of building a community space might be affected, even rendered unfeasible, if they are unable to claim back the VAT. Anthony expressed how this project was not aimed at conventional churchgoers, rather a space for musical, theatrical and other community events. They would dearly like to hear assurances that 800 years of history will be able to carry on with St Andrews remaining at the centre of their community. I received a moving email from a constituent who was deeply concerned about the future of the medieval All Saints Church in Hamilton. The church was where she was married, her children christened, and she hopes future family marriages and christenings too. But with work needed to keep the church building safe, she is worried that the future of All Saints may now be at risk. From Hamilton to Hertford, the treasurer of All Saints Parish Church explained to me in the last 6 years alone they've been able to claim back £50,000 for various projects, including repairs to the church tower, refurbishment of the bells, a new gas boiler, restoration and rebuild of the church organ, installation of a new lighting system and the lime wash on the internal walls. All of this is work that must be done to keep that church going, a site that has had a church standing on it for nearly 1,000 years. Our churches and places of worship are resorting to ever more inventive and ingenious ways to raise funds for the upkeep of their ageing buildings. All Saints Parish Church in St Ives runs a popular event twice a year, Booze in the Pews. I attended the last two events. Speaking with the vicar, Mark Amy, the funds raised go towards the upkeep of the church. And for anybody passing through my constituency in a fortnight's time, the next event will be from the 6th to the 8th of February. I digress. I know that all members see on a daily basis the importance of these places and the people who selflessly devote their lives to serving who we represent. So in summing up, on behalf of all the constituents represented by the members present, I would ask if the Minister could outline what steps the Government will be taking in order to extend the listed places of worship grant scheme. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bromsgrove, for bringing this debate. Mr Weston, a very specific example I want to use in my constituency of South Antrim is All Saints Parish Church in Antrim. One of the finest Elizabethan Gothic ecclesiastic buildings open for worship in the whole island of Ireland, originally built in 1596. It is currently embarking on a repair project for its bell tower, which will cost just over £250,000. Now, they've applied for significant funding, but the £45,000 that they hoped to be able to claim from the scheme was crucial to their budget and for being able to proceed with that work. Why that church is of a specific interest is, unfortunately, following this year's annual Christmas morning service, there was a fire within the church which has caused significant smoke damage to the internal building. So while that church is now looking to repair that smoke damage, plus continuing to repair the outworkings of their building in itself, they're now facing, as a small congregation, two very significant fundraising efforts that they'll be required to undertake. They're willing to do that, but the continuation of the Places of Worship grant scheme was crucial to their budget and going forward. In regards to other churches in my constituency and across Northern Ireland, the Presbyterian Church of Ireland, who I was speaking to, talked about the essential services that would be going on within other churches and church buildings that now may come under pressure that other members have raised. But, Mr Weston, in closing, I have one word for the Minister, and I know he listened to it. Proverbs 11:14. Without wise leadership, a nation falls, and there is safety in having many advisers. The Minister has many advisers in this place today advising him to keep this scheme open, so I would encourage him to listen to those words.
Lincoln York.
Thank you, Mr Weston. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I congratulate my friend, the member for Bromsgrove, for securing this debate. I'm time constrained, so I will just mention St Mary's in Stanwell, a Grade 1 12th century Norman church. One of my overseas visitors remarked to me recently how odd it was that the Normans chose to build such a beautiful church right by Heathrow Airport. I think they slightly missed the point. We also have St Peter's in Staines, St Nicholas's in Shepperton, and All Saints in Laleham, all of which have benefited from the listed places of worship scheme. When churches fall into disrepair, our generation lets our communities down. And when churches crumble, the fabric of society itself crumbles. The Minister is clearly not motivated by self-interest, so I would just point out that my own church, St Mary's in Sunbury, a beautiful Grade 2 listed church built in 1752 down by the River Thames, is due to be visited by Mr Speaker on the 4th of March, where he will conduct a spoken conversation with the congregation there. And should the Minister wish to make himself a hero and ensure that the Speaker gets a very warm welcome from the people of St Mary's in Sunbury, I'm sure he will. See sense, listen to the mood of this room, indeed the mood of the country, and extend this scheme.
Charlotte Kane.
Thank you, Mr Weston, and congratulations to the Honourable Member for Bromsgrove for bringing this important debate. Ely and East Cambridgeshire has many, many beautiful listed places of worship. They form part of the fabric of our villages and towns, and of course Ely Cathedral watches over Ely and the fens and villages for miles around. Their congregations work really hard to maintain these buildings, not just for their own place of worship, but for the benefit of all of us, whether as regular congregants, people who go just for special occasions, or, as we've heard, people who are using the hubs and events and various other activities that happen there. Or just because they are absolutely stunning buildings, part of our heritage and part of the fabric. I used to help assess a related grant scheme, so I have seen how really hard these congregations work to raise the money. Obviously, they do cake sales, book sales, all sorts of things. One of the most inventive ones was guessing where the cow was going to lay her first pat in the field. So asking these people to raise an extra 20% is a significant ask, and as we've heard, it will stop many of these schemes going ahead. I would ask the Minister to extend this scheme and also to consider preferably making it permanent, but if not, extending it for a significant period of time, because these are capital projects, they take a lot of planning, takes years to raise the money, so people need to know into the future that this scheme will be there to help them with those vital repairs.
Yeah. Well said.
Sarah Bull.
Places of worship are treasured assets that really must be preserved. During my degree, I loved studying the role of our church, even reading Bede's ecclesiastical history, which dates back to 731 AD even. But as the father of the house notes, some of our medieval parish churches contain the vast majority of surviving medieval artwork in this country, and they really must be preserved. St Peter's Church, for example, in Brackley, in my constituency, is Grade 1 listed, and this site is believed to date back to the 7th century as a place of worship. The oldest parts of the present church are from around 1100 and are Norman. And although surviving to this day, they also play a great important role in helping as a charitable organisation. And it does help, for example, hosting with the Mothers' Union, which meets monthly on a Thursday afternoon in the church hall. Now, talking to charity and voluntary activity, I am very proud of the support that the Tove Benefice in Toaster via St Lawrence's Church, which is Grade 1 listed, has provided to Ukraine. Led by the Reverend Paula Challen's husband, Steve, they've collected in the church literally tons of aid and have transported this on numerous journeys into Ukraine, and I have so much respect for their support and continued dedication. Just finally, as another example of a treasured asset, and one that comes rather closer to home, St Peter and St Paul Church in Easton Mordaunt is the home to the exquisite memorial to Sir Christopher Yelverton, who died in 1612. Now, Sir Christopher was returned as the MP for Brackley in 1563 and then for Northampton. But he was also, on the 24th of October 1597, elected as Speaker of the House of Commons. Now, this church, alongside that, is also home to captivating architecture, glorious furnishings, and other magnificent memorials and stained glass. We would be at a loss if we did not offer all the support to allow these buildings, with all the succour that they provide, to continue. Thank you.
Jim Shannon.
First of all, can I pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I thank the Honourable Member for Bromsgrove for his contribution. The heritage and faith that we have in this country is one that we wish to see. The preservation and support of places of worship are not just a matter of heritage or architecture, but they are indeed represent a crucial part of the national heritage, and they provide hundreds of millions of pounds to the economy. £30 million allocated annually, only a fraction of what is needed. Strangford, my constituency, is a place steeped in history and tradition where faith has been central to the community for centuries. A tragedy, both spiritually and culturally, at places like St Margaret's Church in Westminster, France, just across the road, or indeed the many churches across this land, were no longer fulfilling their intended purpose as living places of faith and community. It is crucial that government recognise that these buildings are not simply structures but are central to the mission of the church, serving as a base for critical community outreach. They are sanctuaries, places where people come together in worship, prayer and fellowship. They are places where the community comes together to support one another, to be the hands and feet of God in this world. The Heritage Lottery Fund has been encouraged to support some churches with community projects. And Barks Parish Church in Newton Ards, my local community, had a lottery fund and are now a community hub with groups from birth to the twilight years. Many churches are the driving forces behind volunteer-based care for the elderly, for the disabled and marginalised groups. The government must acknowledge that vital role that church plays in the fabric of our society, not only in maintaining cultural heritage, but also in providing essential social services. To this end, government should act decisively. By expanding the Places of Worship scheme, encouraging the Heritage Lottery Fund to allocate more resources, ensuring that funding is available for all necessary repairs, whether urgent or indeed preventative, the government can ensure that churches, cathedrals and abbeys continue to be the heart of British life, preserving our heritage while serving our community and preaching the gospel and the word of God as it is in the Bible. Thank you.
James Nash.
Mr. Weston, for inviting me to speak. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to thank the Minister for tolerating the lamentations of us lay people as a trained Anglican priest who has our best interests at heart, I am sure. I'd like to start by thanking the dozen or so constituents who have written to me about the listed place of worship grant scheme, especially Mark Goodwill-Hodgson, John Edwards, Derek Hollis, Conrad Oatey and Tony Cox, who all shared deeply personal testimonies with me about the importance of their local places of worship in my constituency of Rushcliffe. Mr Weston, what's unique about the listed places of worship grant scheme is its accessibility, paying out approximately 500 grants per month at an average of £4,000 each. We should all be proud of the wider impact that this has had over the last 20 years, and I know that my constituency of Rushcliffe alone has many churches that have benefited from the scheme during that time. Mr Weston, you've asked me to be short, so I will just simply commend this scheme to all members, and I look forward to the outcome of the forthcoming spending review, or indeed the statement later today, when I hope listed places of worship will have greater clarity and certainty about their futures under this government.
Adam.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I congratulate the member for Bromsgrove. I come from a different angle. I was very much unaware of this. I'd really like to thank the very Reverend Karen Rooms of Leicester Cathedral of making me aware of this. Leicester Cathedral is the cathedral where we found King Richard III in a car park and re-interned it in our Leicester Cathedral, and many believe in our city, which led to Leicester City winning the Premiership the season after. So it's absolutely vital to us. Cathedrals are more than a place of beauty, religion and art. I, as a Muslim, volunteer for a Sikh charity serving food in a Christian church for the whole community. Reflecting what has been said, churches and cathedrals are places of community cohesion. I also come from a culture where we don't own places of worship. We are simply custodians of places of worship. And our churches and our cathedrals, we are custodians of them.
Would
and
the
they...
Honourable Gentleman allow me? You've got the time. The Honourable Gentleman makes a very fair point. It's been raised earlier in this debate and it worried me. Of course, our parish churches are important, but is it not right that our cathedrals are also monumentally expensive to maintain? It is not the grant every bit as valuable to, for example, Canterbury Cathedral, the see of the Archbishop of Canterbury?
I agree wholeheartedly, and I think they are our heritage. We must save them and for our future generations. I do not think this scheme should be extended. I think they should be made permanent and for many places of worship. Thank you.
I call on Liberal Democrat spokesperson Tessa Munt, and I would appreciate it if you can reduce to about 9 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr Weston, and it's a pleasure to serve with you as our chair. And can I congratulate the honourable member for Bromsgrove in calling this. I'd also like to congratulate my friends for Chichester, Hazel Grove, South Cambridgeshire, Taunton, Wellington, Ely and East Cambridgeshire for the points that they've made. But if I'll give way.
In my beautiful constituency of Tiverton and Minehead, I have 25 Grade 1 listed churches. There's hardly a village in my constituency which doesn't have a Grade 1 listed church, and churches that are within other status. And I'd hope that the honourable member would agree with me that without this grant, there are dark days ahead for these communities.
I'd thank my honourable friend, and I'll add to my list the seat of Tiverton and Minehead. So I wondered if I might quote, first of all, actually, one of the people who'd written to me said, it's such a great scheme because volunteers who raise money for church repairs find it such hard work making multiple lengthy applications for grants with usually little to show in return. This VAT relief, once the funds have been raised, is one thing is definitely certain, and that is that it takes the edge off all of the effort. And I recognise that this scheme in 2024 has already given 5,000 listed places of worship the benefit of returning up to £42 million from the government to congregations across the country. And that 42 million is a fixed annual pot, and there's over 7,000 applications, as I understand it. So I wondered if I might just briefly
indulge, if I might be indulged in actually talking about my own particular constituency, which I know the Minister has visited on occasions. And that is to say that I have, of course, had numerous communications with people who have mainly churches, but I have significantly Wells Cathedral, at which I have to say I saw Jethro Tull play a few years ago. So the variety of activities is enormous. My partner, and I should probably declare an interest, my partner actually played table tennis in Christchurch at Thiel last week. Holy Trinity Blackford has, it has carols with vast slugs of wine provided to the whole congregation. St Cuthbert's at Wells has a crib festival. St John the Baptist in Axbridge hosts the annual Community Wards presentation. Others, like the Holy Trinity Church in Burrington and Wookey Hole, St Mary Magdalene Church, all of these places have Remembrance Sunday services where we recall the duty and that people have paid to this country. My local church, St Mary's in Wedmore, runs Clash of the Choirs, which is now world famous, I have to say. It sounds very sedate, but it's actually a very joyous celebration of all sorts of singing and school choirs, folk, handbells, and there's a very unique clapometer. There's the City of Wells Almshouses, which is home to some of our more vulnerable elderly citizens. And the Chapel of St Saviour is benefit at this moment from works that are being carried out under this scheme. One of the things I would like to ask the Minister, please, to consider is that actually when the conditions that are required for people to claim under this scheme, as I understand it, the VAT refund is dependent on having work commissioned and carried out and paid for against a VAT invoice of £1,000 or more. And so a number of these, as I understand it, sir, and only then is the church able to submit a claim. One of my concerns is if this scheme is to be reduced or to be stopped and wound up, then I'd ask the Minister for great understanding and for transition arrangements for those churches and chapels that have already got works in train, because it's quite difficult for people to get that work done, particularly when a number of my communities have been suffering from flooding and various other things, so the number of contractors that is available has been reduced also. So I'll not carry on too much in detail, but I have to say I was very pleased to receive a letter from the Minister which recognised that listed places of worship hold great cultural and historical significance, representing some of the nation's finest heritage. And I'm grateful that the Minister recognises that and that the Secretary of State recognises that. And I'd ask, please, for some tolerance and kindness in continuing this scheme, which is so important to our various communities.
Call on the opposition spokesperson, Sakib Bhatti.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to start by praising my honourable friend from Bromsgrove for securing this really vital and important debate. As we can see from this debate, it's incredibly important to many members of the House, and I want to just acknowledge contributions from a number of members. Unfortunately, given time, I can't acknowledge everybody, but South Northamptonshire, Newport West, Gainsborough, York Central, Huntingdon, Mid-Buckinghamshire, Spelthorne, Torridge and Tavistock. I thought they all made wonderful contributions, as did the other members who I've not been able to mention. They've all made their faith communities incredibly proud. Mr. Chairman, I take your steer, and I'm going to try and give the Minister as much time as possible to satisfy the members in this House, because this is a really, really important debate. Britain is defined by its history. Up and down the country, people are fiercely proud of their heritage, and as is Majesty's loyal opposition, it is therefore right that we hold the government to account on this as we try and stand up for our history and protect our heritage. On this side of the House, we have campaigned for this, and we've done it very vehemently. And I know there's a WMS on the way. As my honourable friend from Gainsborough said, this might be the shortest campaign ever, and I hope he does satisfy. And it might be the shortest WMS, I hope, telling us how he is extending the scheme. But I want to thank all the people from across the country who have written to us on this issue. Their voice matters. And I want to also thank all the volunteers who protect our most beautiful heritage sites. Mr Chairman, the Conservatives are very clear. Britain's rich history, deep sense of tradition and incredible national story is something we should always protect, and there is no doubt that our churches and our other places of worship that have been announced are fundamental to this. These cherished buildings play key roles in their local communities, serving both as a window into our past and active centres of support and sanctuary for people of all faiths and none. The people who look after them, as custodians of our future generations, are volunteers who give generously of their time and energy with very little external help. But many of them are reliant on the vital lifeline, which is the Listed Places of Worship grant scheme. Introduced in 2001, the scheme provides essential grants covering the VAT charged on repairs to listed buildings used as places of worship. And I'm proud that we in government, the Conservatives, had a very strong record of supporting this important scheme. Under the previous government, the Listed Places of Worship grant scheme was extended, providing funding to cover VAT on essential repairs, which meant thousands of churches were protected for generations to come. However, and this may change, but Labour are yet to announce whether they will fund the scheme past its expiry in March this year. The budget came and went without an answer. This uncertainty is making the task of those who look after these precious buildings more precarious and more stressful. And many are understandably delaying their plans until the government makes up its mind, meaning more leaky roofs, more drafty windows and more cold churches during the vital Christmas period. And with the WMS on the way, I'm hopeful that the Minister will announce something meaningful and something beyond 1 year, because I share my honourable friend from Bromsgrove's ambition for permanency of this grant, and I hope the Minister can address that point. According to Historic England, 969 places of worship are under threat, including churches in the Prime Minister's own constituency. And when questioned about the scheme at the dispatch box last week, the Minister for Media, Tourism and Creative Industries quoted a hymn at the dispatch box. But I would argue the custodians of our historic churches need more than a hymn and a prayer. They deserve clarity and support from the government, which I hope the Minister can give us today. This is important because Historic England's informative Heritage at Risk register paints a harrowing picture for England's historic sites. For places of worship in particular, the possibility of roofs collapsing or lack of maintenance on stonework would be catastrophic. In my own constituency of Meriden and Solihull East, I've had numerous constituents write to me about their concerns for some of our most beloved local churches. They told me that discontinuing the scheme would be a disaster for listed places of worship, and that the ability to reclaim VAT makes an enormous difference, particularly at a time when the cost of building work has increased substantially. And there is great frustration about the government's failure to confirm this extension of this vital scheme. And it's not just felt by constituents, it has an impact on all our communities and the rest of society. The Chair of the National Churches Trust, Sir Philip Rutnam, has called on the government to renew the Listed Places of Worship Fund. Sir Philip states that the crisis affecting church heritage could get worse in the coming months if this vital financial lifeline is scrapped. The Bishop of Dudley, Bishop Martin Gorrick, also paints a bleak picture, saying that it is not just heritage that is at risk if the scheme lapses. Churches and other places of worship are home to so much social enterprise and action. Church of England churches support over 35,000 social action projects, 35,000, such as food banks, community larders and debt, drug, alcohol advice and rehabilitation groups. And the director of the Friends of Friendless Churches, Rachel Morley, wrote to the Secretary of State saying that the impact of this cut at a parish level would be devastating, and that we place the burden of caring for thousands of the nation's most important buildings, undoubtedly the nation's greatest free heritage resources, on a tiny proportion of the public who are, for the most part, volunteers. That was a view very eloquently shared by my right honourable friend for Torridge and Tavistock. So I hope the government will confirm the continuation of this scheme as soon as possible, or better still, an expanded scheme which helps the custodians of listed places of worship to carry out vital repair works in the first place. One challenge I'd put is this has been a rebate for many, many years. Let's make it into a grant and let's make it permanent. And will you, of course, consider my right honourable friends, the member for Christchurch, private members bill? I think it raises quite a vital point, and I hope he certainly addresses that. But, Mr Chairman, I can't speak about this issue without addressing the broader economic picture, because if the government were to neglect these cherished buildings, for me, as has previously been said, it would be an act of vandalism. It would come as no surprise to many of our constituents if this Labour government did turn a blind eye to this threat to our heritage, given where we are economically. We have seen the calamitous impact of the Chancellor's callous budget on our great houses already, and I've already written and made comments about this, certainly on our historic houses, for example. Independent analysis has shown that the dramatic increases in inheritance tax could spell an end for many of our historic and heritage sites and estates across the country. This would cost jobs and mean some of the UK's most popular stately homes would be closed. So I have very little confidence in the long-term faith that the government would put in our heritage. And of course, the dire economic circumstances make a big difference to this. I've already raised this on the floor of the House because, of course, it is quite clear and becoming ever more clear that the Chancellor will have to cut budgets. So while many of my constituents and certainly many of our voters don't believe they can afford a Labour government, what they certainly cannot afford is the Minister abandoning our most vital sector. So I encourage him to stand up to the Chancellor and try and protect those vital budgets. Because, of course, as this economy and the cost of debt goes up and the economy starts to come into more dire situations, the Chancellor will have even less headroom to spend on schemes like the listed places of worship. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, in deference to your timing request, I will try and conclude here. And I share the concerns of many beyond this House that the government are still yet to protect our heritage. And as we've heard from across this House, hundreds of churches have been left in a deep sense of uncertainty for months. And the government's failure to commit to this funding risks imperiling centuries of British history and heritage, all whilst leaving gaping holes in our local communities, depriving our constituents with spaces to accommodate celebration, grief, art, music, sculpture, political hustings, of course, wellbeing groups, childcare and addiction support sessions, and so much more. The listed places of worship scheme is essential, and I urge the Minister to make the strongest possible case for its renewal to the Treasury going forward. Because, of course, otherwise, many of our constituents will be left asking, is nothing sacred anymore?
Minister Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weston. I feel as if I've been beaten up for the last hour and a quarter in the most genteel way, with a maniple rather than a boxing glove. I see most people don't know what a maniple is in the room. That's maybe I'm the only priest or former priest in the room. If I might just gently say to the Shadow Minister, he coruscates me for citing a hymn, which was "Nearer and nearer draws the time that will surely come when the earth shall be filled with the glory of God, and the department will announce its decisions." He says that the church can't rely on a hymn and a prayer. Well, actually, literally, that is what the church does rely on. If I might just gently correct his theology, he needs to go back to the 39 Articles. I'm quite happy to provide tutorials for him. We've had Bede, not in Latin, I note, but we've had Jethro Tull. I think that was Jethro Tull music rather than the agronomist from the 18th century. Matthew Arnold, I'll come back to Matthew Arnold, if I might, a little bit later. Betjeman, of course, and we've had Proverbs. Now, we had Proverbs 11:14, I think, quoted at me very sensibly. But if you go back up to 11:13, of course, you have, in the King James Version, always my preferred. I thought that might carry at least half the House. A talebearer revealeth secrets, but he that is of a faithful spirit concealeth the matter. Or perhaps in a more modern translation, a gossip betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy person keeps a secret. And that's what we've been doing in the department for a while now. I warmly commend the member for Bromsgrove. He put his case extremely well. I think I agreed with nearly everything he said, and I'll come on to that in a little moment. If I might just go to the member for Torridge and Tavistock, one of my favourite Conservative members of the House. He quoted Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach. He knew that I'd know what he was quoting. The sea of faith was once too at the full, but now I only hear its melancholy long withdrawing roar. And he's quite right. It's part of the problem that we have, that with very dwindling congregations, sometimes fewer than a dozen, I mean, I know it says where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there too am I. But nonetheless, when you're down to 2 or 3, it's pretty difficult to raise the funds for a beautiful ancient building that is very expensive to maintain or indeed even keep warm. Those are very significant challenges which I want to work with all honourable members on into the future, because we've mostly, I think, focused on Anglican churches. I note, obviously, a few Catholic churches, not many medieval ones around, but of course this applies to all listed places of worship in the country, and many different congregations and denominations and religions participate in this. But there is a very specific issue for a lot of the very historic churches that we have, which are beautiful and need our help as a nation. The member for Bromsgrove is absolutely right. These are community hubs as much as they are anything else. Youth groups. I used to run the youth group in All Saints, High Wycombe, in the church. I think I was a bit of a trendy vicar back then. That's all gone now. Food banks, as he referred to, running many. And in fact, the old Conservative Association in one of my valleys, which closed, became the food bank, and that's run by a new church that has been set up in there, and they've managed to save an old historic building, which is great. Choirs and orchestras often perform. They're warm spaces often in the winter for people, though my memory of most churches is that they're very rarely warm places, actually. But sometimes managing to make a segment of a church a warm place is one of the things that the fund has been able to help with. And of course, they're refuges too for lots of people. As well as the bit that we've not mentioned very much, they are a place of worship. And that is a very important part of the spiritual life of this nation, whether it's births, deaths, or baptisms, funerals, weddings. They're a very important part of that experience of community life and commitment to God. They're also of phenomenal artistic and architectural importance. Some of the most beautiful buildings in this country are historic churches. I noticed that the Honourable Member for Salisbury mentioned Salisbury Cathedral. Famous painting, of course, renowned, a very beautiful cathedral. I cannot now think of Salisbury Cathedral without remembering the horrific, horrible Russians who claimed that they had only come to Salisbury, when we know that they actually came with murderous intent to visit and to see the tourist site there. But it's an important point that many of these places are a vital part of our tourism in the country. They're also often a living archive. Whether it's the memorials on the wall or on the floor, the brass rubbings that people look at, or the churchyards themselves. I mean, genealogy is still a very big business around the world. There are thousands and thousands of Americans. I think Walt Disney at one point came to, I think it's in Northamptonshire, where there's a Disney, who may or may not be related to Walt Disney. But there are many Americans who've come to British churches to see where their forebears came from.
Will the Minister allow me?
I will, though I have to be tight on time.
Would the Minister accept that what he's just referred to, that the volume of tourists, is absolutely essential to many listed buildings, in particular places like Canterbury Cathedral? But of course, that volume of tourism also adds to the cost of the maintenance.
Yes, it does, and I know for many cathedrals it's a difficult balancing act as to whether or not to charge. These are complicated decisions for them, but simply the passage of millions and millions of people through a building does wear it down, and toilets have to be renewed, places have to be kept warm, electricity has to be repaired and to be safe, and of course I think we've had a couple of references to fires in churches over the years as well. So I fully accept that. I mean, that is a massive challenge for us. And we have a different settlement in this country from in other countries. The Church of England has its own, what we, when I was in the Diocese of Oxford, used to refer to as dead men's money, which is the historic endowment that the Church has, but often that is stretched very, very thin. We've talked about funding. Obviously, the churches themselves do a lot of fundraising, and I want to put on record my tribute to the many, to the widow's mite, but also to those who have contributed very significant sums over the years to keeping churches open, I think Andrew Lloyd Webber has played a significant role in that, but there are many others as well who have given tens of thousands of pounds or left money to their local church. When I was a curate in High Wycombe, we had to raise thousands of pounds for the spire. I think I sat for 24 hours outside the church reading poems, and including Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach, to help raise money, and then they threw me out of an aeroplane as well with a parachute. But the single biggest chunk of money actually that goes to churches, as the Honourable Member for Bromsgrove himself will know, comes of course from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. Between 2017 and 2023, the amount of money that was given to smaller churches came to £165,188,049. That far eclipses the amount of money, of course, that comes through the scheme that we're talking about today. And even in Bromsgrove, 1.2 million has gone in his constituency since 1994 from that fund, and St Lawrence Alve Church received £189,000 for repairs to the tower just last year. In addition, there's the Churches Conservation Trust. That is governed by the Redundant Churches Act 1969, and we should be laying the statutory instrument fairly soon in order to enable that to continue, and that's something in the region of £3 million. It has a specific number of churches that it has responsibility for. And in addition to that, of course, the Church of England has set aside £11 million for its Buildings for Mission fund, all of which is excellent. But I have to say that as a minister in the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, the financial situation in our department is very tough. Many of the members who've spoken today could equally have come along today and asked me about the museums in their constituency or the libraries in their constituency, which have struggled because of local authority funding cuts over the last 14 years. Or they might be saying to me, what about the local theatre or the local arts venue, which is struggling for finances, or the music venues that have been closing 2 a week for the last few years? Or they might point to other forms of heritage at risk. Indeed, the Shadow Minister himself has made several spending commitments for the next general election campaign, I note, wanting significant extra funding for a whole series of different heritage bodies. Now, it's good that, a significant number of churches are on the list, at the register of places of heritage at risk. It's good that 23 places of worship have been removed from that since 2023, but obviously we want to go further if we possibly can. I have tried, Mr Weston, to come to the House as soon as I possibly could after we had come to a decision. Going through the process in the department has been difficult because the funding is so tight and we have a lot of competing demands. And in addition to that, we have a series of arm's-length bodies, such as the National Galleries and Museums, which are government-owned and government responsibility, and whom we can't leave out of the equation. So I note the Father of the House's comments earlier. I'm sure he's not accusing me of some kind of hidden tactic here. I've just wanted to come as soon as I possibly can to respond to the debate, which we knew was going to be today. I've got officials and everybody lined up as fast as we possibly can, so I could make the proper announcements to the House, because I think Parliament should hear first. You will be aware, Mr Weston, from today's order paper that an announcement on the future of the listed places of worship grant scheme is due today. It's not going to say much more than I'm about to say now, so I wouldn't get very excited about the written ministerial statement, but I'm pleased to be able to give certainty and announce that the scheme will continue in 2025-2026 with a budget of £23 million. We've made this difficult decision against a tough financial background and bearing in mind a wide range of compelling priorities for expenditure within the department. In order to meet the budget, we have introduced a cap on the total amount a listed place of worship can claim per year. We have set this at £25,000. This can still be spread across multiple claims from the same church. 94% of applications have been under the £25,000 cap over all the years so far. Indeed, we know that most claims, the vast majority, over 70%, are actually for under £5,000. A written ministerial statement will be made shortly in both houses to confirm and provide further details of this announcement, but there's not much more detail there, to be honest. Well, I will, but I'm meant to be giving time for the member for Bromsgrove.
Thank you. Very grateful to the Minister. He says £25 million. It's a £42 million funding in the past. Is that correct? So is this a cut of 20-odd million?
No, it's not correct. The maximum amount that was spent last year was 29 million. So it is a smaller amount of money. I'll be straight with the Honourable Minister. An allocation had been made for, to the member. Sorry, an allocation had been made for 42 million, but that amount was never spent because there weren't sufficient applications. By tradition, Mr. Weston, a cathedral is not symmetrical because only God is perfect. I'm sure this is not perfection for what everybody would want, but I hope it is at least acceptable.
Bradley Thomas to wind up.
Thank you, Chair. Conscious I've only got a short amount of time, I won't get into individual thank yous, but we'll collectively thank everyone. Really pleased to see the extent of cross-party support here, that people have approached this in a non-political spirit, recognising the heritage, identity, the spiritual contribution that churches and listed places of worship make across the entire country. I welcome the Minister for providing a continuation of a scheme for the year 25-26, although I think the member for Taunton was spot on when he said the scheme as it was a bargain. I think this will be a false economy to reduce the scheme, to not give it a degree of permanence, and I do implore the Minister to go back to his department and consider how this scheme can be extended permanently.
Order.
With greater value.
Order. I will call, just wait for members to leave the chamber.